Oh, hello. My name is Mara, and welcome to Books Like Whoa. Happy end of the year, everyone. This is my last 2019 update that is going up, even though it will go up in 2020. I hope that 2019 was, at least a year of growing and learning, even if it wasn't the best year, or I hope it was just completely joyful and awesome. Either way, I hope you are excited to dive into your 2020. I know I am. You guys will still be getting several kind of wrapping up 2019 and getting into 2020 videos here for the next couple of weeks. I think really until the mid-January point, I'm still sort of doing the transition between years, but I hope you guys don't mind. I think not. The response to all of my end of the year videos has been really positive, so I think you guys like these kinds of videos as much as I do. I love watching them. I love making them. This is like my favorite time of year here on BookTube. So I hope you guys have been enjoying all of that. And I will say that in the midst of doing a lot of filming, pre-filming, editing, planning, all of that, I did still manage to read quite a bit. If you don't know, I kind of wrap up my year reading kind of in the middle of December, and from that point on just do pure mood reading. So after that point, I rarely have many books that would normally make an end of the year list. And if I do read one, which there is one I read since then that I think could make an end of list year for next year, I just push it forward into the next year. So all that to say, what that means is that in December, I did a lot of comfort mood reading, a lot of like short story or like novella kind of things, holiday romances, like mystery, just sort of mood yummy reading and rereading. One of the things I want to do next year is catch up with the Immortals After Dark series. So I did a little rereading in that series and listening to that Fated Mates podcast about it. Anyway, it's just been, I wouldn't say like my highest quality reading month, but it's definitely been a very just sort of like comfy reading month. So let me tell you a little bit about my stats, and then we will get into my disappointments, my surprises, and my hits for the month. So I am filming this on the last day of December, so I do think I'm going to end up finishing one more book, but we're just going to call it for right now. So in the month of December, I read 28 books. Like I said, a lot of those were definitely on the lighter end, which is how I got to that number. But I read 28 books. I read 7,020 pages for an average book length of 250 pages. Not surprisingly, like I said, I was reading a lot of sort of short novels or novellas in there. Average length of time on my TBR was 5 months, which is really good for me. And then the average age of the book was 2 years, which is not as good. I'd like it to be closer to 10, but whatever. Proportionally, about 2/3 of the book I read came from my owned TBR, so books that I owned, and then 9 came from ones like either from the library or a subscription service, because I did read a lot of ebooks this month. So beyond that, in terms of genre, I was very weighted towards romance and mystery, like I was saying, so definitely a lot of short contemporaries I read for romance, and then I was reading a lot of like kind of short, fun mystery type things, and then pretty much everything else was sort of just smattering in between there. For the most part, it was like a very romance mystery kind of month for me. So the only other thing I wanted to mention is that because I was reading a lot of sort of short light things, I didn't have a very high average rating. I had an average rating of 3.26, which is still good. And actually, now that I'm looking at it, I had more 4-star reads than I thought that I did, but definitely very weighted in there with the 3, 3.5, 4 range. And then a couple of like one notable DNF we'll talk about, and then a few just sort of like not as good things thrown in there as well. Those are my overall stats. And then in terms of challenges, I'm ending the year pretty well on my challenges. So I did catch up with the In-Depth series this month. I met that goal. Good job, me. We will talk more about that. I did complete my classics challenge as of last month, so that one was good. In terms of my reading women's challenge, I had that bingo board, and my goal was to get 5 bingos, and I did meet that. They all fell down. Completed my 4th bingo because that very prominently featured a woman with a mental illness. And then Madness of Sunshine by Nalini Singh is a mystery or thriller by a woman of color. So I got to the 5th bingo with that one, so I did end up meeting that challenge, which I wasn't sure I was going to, so that was great. The only challenge that I feel like I definitely didn't complete the way I was hoping to was my 19 books I want to read in 2019, and I will go into more detail on that for the video that is coming up here very shortly, or has come out, I can't quite remember, which is 20 books I want to read in 2020, and I will talk a little bit more in detail about that, but kind of the TLDR of that is that I did read 15 out of 19. I don't think I'm going to quite finish Essays in Understanding by the end of the year, but I'm just about done with that. So functionally 16 out of 19 I either read or DNF'd. And then the 3 that I didn't get to are authors, like some of my very favorite authors. So I'm going to get to those eventually. I'm not that worried about it, but I didn't quite read all 19 of those. So you'll hear more about that in that other video. And yeah, I think that that does it for challenges. Wow, that's weird to say. That does it for challenges for 2019. I'm about to have a whole fresh slate of challenges coming up here in 2020, starting with the Getting Shit Done readathon. That is going to be running the whole month of January. Got my announcement video up somewhere for that, so that will be the first challenge I'm tucking into, but there will be others to come, so stay tuned to see how all that unfolds. But yeah, okay, so I think that that covers kind of high-level things. We'll start with my disappointments, because I definitely had some disappointments this month. Okay, so let's start with my 2 probably biggest disappointments, but I also talked about this in my mid-month check-in, so I don't want to linger on it too long, but my 2 biggest disappointments were definitely Gideon the Ninth by Tamsyn Muir, because I ended up DNFing this because I was frankly just bored. Like, that's what it boils down to. It wasn't like, I can totally see why people do like this book. It just wasn't quite a book for me. It's a little too much style, not enough substance. Just my take on that one. So I DNF'd this one, so that was my most disappointing because, you know, I was hoping I was gonna like it. But I guess the upside is it was a big hyped book this year, so I do have an opinion about it now. And then the other book that was really disappointing to me was They All Fall Down, just because this was a mystery that was based on And Then There Were None, which y'all know I'm an absolute sucker for. That kind of mystery, this kind of book, totally in my wheelhouse, and it just didn't really work, I think. There's definitely successful elements of this book, so I would try again with this author because I think there were interesting ideas in here. I just think for the type of puzzle mystery it was, there were just some ill-advised decisions. That's kind of what it boils down to in terms of perspective and pacing, etc. So that was definitely a big bummer because I was really hoping I was gonna like this. And then the only other disappointment I wanted to mention, just because it's one of my it's one of my lowest rated stories in the In Death series, was Possession in Death by J.D. Robb. So this was a novella, oh, I forget what number, I want to say it's like 31.5, something like that. And it did a thing that the In Death books do sometimes, and I noticed, like, because I've been reading a few of these novellas this month, I think it's something that does happen more in the novellas or the short novels than it does in the main series, which is that there is definitely a supernatural element to this one. It's called Possession in Death because basically Eve starts this mystery off by getting possessed by a Romani woman who can, like, talk to the dead. She is murdered and she possesses Eve to get justice for her granddaughter, or like save her granddaughter, kind of a thing. And I just don't think that the In Death series can really hold those supernatural elements very well. It's already got so much going on with it in terms of genre. Like, it's a near future sci-fi world. It is a crime procedural, and then it's really a romantic suspense because there's like this core couple that's a big part of what's going on. So it's like already 3 pretty distinct flavors of genre, and I think when you add in the supernatural element to it, I just don't think it can totally hold it. There is this concept in this world of people being sensitives, which basically is a kind of light form of being psychic or being able to mind read, but it's played as something that straddles the line between supernatural and scientific. Like, it's kind of implied that it's something that is recognized. People know that it's a thing. And it seems to be kind of viewed as like a more natural phenomenon and not as supernatural. So that, when that happens in the books, I'm more okay with that because the world it plays as if it is a natural phenomenon more so. But whenever these books occasionally do incorporate like Wiccan elements and like magical elements, and whenever that happens, I'm just not really sold on it. And then specifically in this case, because it is a Romani woman, that whole bit, I don't love as a stereotype or as, I don't know. I felt like it was a lot. It just felt like a lot. That's what it boils down to. So I ended up giving this story 2 stars, which is a shame because if that piece hadn't been in, it was a perfectly good mystery. Like that, I guess that was the other piece. I was like, why did you include this? Because it was a perfectly interesting mystery as is, and it could have totally worked. She could have even been like the woman who possessed her at her death. She could have even been as sensitive and like had documented proof that wasn't easily provable without Eve having to be possessed. I don't know. I didn't think that that worked. And actually, you know what? With that, we can go ahead and move into surprises because one of my surprises was Vendetta in Death, which is the 49th book and is the book that I read to catch up fully with all the novels. I have 3 novellas left that I'm going to read in January, and then I will be 100% caught up and ready for the 50th book in February. This was really good. I gave this 4 stars, and the reason I put it as a surprise is because only 4 or 5 books ago, we had a plot very similar to this one with Brotherhood in Death, but I was surprised and pleased to see kind of it was a very similar plot or like subgenre of a procedural where there are like these men basically who are behaving badly and like the women that they have harmed take vengeance against them in some way or another. That's really kind of the core conceit of both of those books. But this one, even though it comes so quickly after Brotherhood in Death, I think still really works. And I think this was definitely written after the Me Too movement. So thinking through kind of some of her shifts of how she thinks about or talks about some of these things, I thought was interesting. And just generally, I was impressed and surprised to see that 2 sort of really similar books in a lot of ways could still feel very distinct and still have, I think, a lot of energy to them. So I think Brotherhood in Death is a slightly better book, but this was still really good. Like 4 stars. Definitely a very like solid in-depth entry, above average, I would say. And then we can transition into a string of surprises just because these were very light books that I don't have a lot of expectations for, like I have pretty low expectations for usually, and they all managed to surprise me in one way or another. So first of all, I listened to an Audible original called The Christmas Pact, which it was very interesting to look at the reviews of this one because I think people, like, because it was a free Audible original that's included in your subscription if you want it, I think that not a lot more non-romance readers were reading it than normal. So looking at the reviews, I'm like, oh, well, that's just like a part of how this genre works. So I wonder, like, it made me wonder if some of the less positive reviews were just a function of somebody getting something for free that they don't normally like and then not liking it. Anyway, I thought this actually surprised me. So this was a romance audiobook that I like, which, you know, can sometimes be a little bit of a struggle for me. And I thought that it was just, it kind of had a few slight twists on the Christmas fake relationship trope that I personally love. Like, I know it's a very common one in a Christmas romance, and it's one that I personally just really enjoy. It's improbable, but fun. And I liked the meet cute premise of this one. So basically one of them's name, I believe, is Riley Kennedy, and the other one's name is Kennedy Riley. It's a guy and a girl, and they both work for the same company, and so they get each other's emails sometimes. And so, like, it's sort of, not hate to love, but I would say disdain to love, where she's very annoyed by his commentary on her emails. He, I think, sees it as a little bit more playful. Anyway, circumstances bring them together, and I was surprised at how much I liked the book, and then I was very surprised that I liked it so much as audio. And it's a book that is definitely... It has frank discussions of sexuality, and it doesn't have, one thing I don't like in books that are closed door is sometimes they can read like they're a little squeamish about sex. This did not read that way at all. Like, there was a whole thing about a vibrator. Like, it did not seem like it was shy about sex, but it didn't actually have any described sex scenes in it. And I actually thought it worked really well. Like, oftentimes I find that not having that scene, it's not even the scene that's important. It's just like structurally the way romances are normally written. Not having the scene feels weird sometimes in terms of sort of like the expected pacing of the story. This one didn't include a sex scene, and it didn't feel like it was because the author was like afraid to go there, and it also didn't mess up the flow of the story. So it was just like kind of a little bit of a surprise to me that it ended up working so well to me as audio, and that it worked so well without on-page sex scene. So anyway, I enjoyed that one, and I think I guess by the time you guys are seeing this, you probably can't get it for free anymore. But if you're an Audible member, maybe go look and see if you can get it for free still. So that was the Christmas Pact. I guess I'll put these two together. So I discovered a new sort of like Kindle Unlimited smutty author that I'm enjoying called Mink. Kind of an amazing pen name. I'm like really into that. They had two novellas I read this month, one of which was a free, I read it before this happened, but it turned out it was a free story through the Read Me Romance podcast. One was called Hitman's Prey, and one was called Snow Angel. And Snow Angel is definitely like a holiday novella kind of thing. And I ended up really enjoying this. This had a level of crazy sauce to it where the author was self-aware about the crazy sauce. And that is something I really enjoy. I wasn't sure what to expect because, you know, one of them, the Hitman's Prey, the thing that kept me from really fully loving it is the fact that like, he is a hitman and like viciously murders people. Played off like a rom-com, and I mean, it was crazy. Like, it was crazy sauce. So I kind of enjoyed it, but then when I thought about it, I was like, well, that's not great. Like, not a very heroic trait for the main male lead in this one. But the thing that surprised me about both of them is that they both feature very, like, two heroines who have extreme social anxiety, and actually really appreciated the way that that was portrayed. I think it didn't feel, I think sometimes that's set up as something one of the characters is struggling with, but you never really see the implications of that in the story. And in both of these, I really thought that the author captured something nice about like what extreme social anxiety can feel like. That's not something that I deal with all the time, but I can definitely kind of relate to that at different periods of my life. So I just like the way that she portrayed that. And I liked Snow Angel even better than Hitman's Prey because it didn't have any like the vicious murdering I had to overlook. Anyway, overall, I just thought those were really fun. And it's always nice to find a new sort of like Kindle Unlimited, fun, sassy, smutty kind of romance author to read. Oh, and yeah, speaking of another Read Me Romance surprise, Dr. Dave by Abby Knox, I actually really liked. I just wanted to mention this is because I'd never seen this as a setup, which is the heroine is a caller to the hero's relationship advice radio show. And I just thought that was a really fun setup. So I like that one just for the unique setup of it. Very improbable, very crazy pants. But if you're in the mood for that, I thought that one was fun. And then definitely my biggest surprise in rounding out this little run of like short, sassy romance things. So I saw someone on Goodreads had rated a series that was referred to as Hot Mush, Pride and Prejudice something. And I was like, what is that? And so I historically have not been into Pride and Prejudice fan fiction per se. There's like exceptions to that. And actually this little run made me go reread one of the biggest exceptions to that, which is Unequal Affections. And then I also reread Heartstone. Heartstone is more of a retelling in a fantasy world, which is excellent. And then Unequal Affections by Laura Ormiston, something like that. I just think is actually really high quality Pride and Prejudice fan fiction. It basically is the premise of like, what if Lizzie had ended up saying yes to Darcy when he proposed the first time, and kind of goes from there. So I learned just through reading this author, which I believe her name is Lory Lilian, that there's like a whole like language and vocabulary around different types of Pride and Prejudice retellings or fan fiction. And I have learned something, which is that I do enjoy, it turns out that I can enjoy a Pride and Prejudice fan fiction if it is not super over the top smutty. So like, I have read a couple of them where I'm just like, I just feel like I am intruding on Lizzie and Mr. Darcy's privacy right now. Like, I just can't read a ton of very explicit smut about the two of them. And I feel like that is frequently a feature of this kind of book or this kind of like fan fiction thing. But this struck a really nice balance because so I had two that I liked. I liked Sketching Mr. Darcy pretty well. It dragged. You could definitely tell it started its life as fan fiction where it was like being released one chapter at a time because it just like went on a real long time. But it had some ridiculous plot machinations. Like if you've ever wanted to see a crazed Lady Catherine de Bourgh plotting to like murder Lizzie, here you go. This is a good one. But both of these, the other one I read that I liked even better was I think Ardently Loving or something like that. The cover's right here. I liked it even better. And what it did was it does have a little, it has a described sex scene in both of these, but it's vague enough that I didn't feel just like wrong reading it. It felt more like a normal historical romance where like you would expect to have that scene, kind of like what I was talking about earlier, that just like structurally, the way that we do genre romance fiction at this point, you kind of just expect a sex scene at certain junctures. So I felt like this gave me the enjoyment of a fan fiction where I'm getting to spend more time with my favorite characters and see like different what if scenarios, like, which I really like about fan fiction. It just gives you a chance to sort of create your own headcanon. So I got the enjoyment of that, and I got the normal structure of a historical romance as I would expect it, with sex scenes at certain points, but I didn't feel like I was having to like intrude on these like precious people's intimate lives in a way that I just don't feel comfortable intruding on the Darcys that way. It usually bothers me. Anyway, all that to say, I wouldn't say that this was like super high quality in terms of writing, but as like a comfort read and like an elevated version of fan fiction, it got the job done, and I just enjoyed like spending more time with people in that world that I enjoy so much. Okay, so with that little run of random one-offy romances that I was reading in my comfort phase of the month, I do have 4 hits that I want to mention. So I'll just start at the top of this pile and work my way down. First of all, How Long Till Black Future Month by N.K. Jemisin. I included this on my best of sci-fi and fantasy list for the year, and this is just a super strong collection of short stories. Like, it's not perfect. There are highs and lows for sure, which is kind of the name of the game in a short story collection. It's rare for me to read a short story collection that I think really works start to finish. And I will tell you that I think that this is very much a case, and she even kind of talks about this in the intro, of it's almost what I would describe as like a sketchbook short story collection, where you can tell that she's working out story ideas, she's working out world construction or premise construction, and you can really see that several of these are probably going to be a full book at some point, and I was okay with that. Like, but what that did mean is that some of these short stories I don't think felt as fully realized on their own terms. But, you know, like for instance, one of the short stories in here, very clearly to me, I could tell is probably going to be the basis for that The City We Became book she's releasing in 2020. So, you know, I'm fine with that as a project, and I do find it really interesting. And I feel like this was a really good first read for me from N.K. Jemisin, because I feel like I have a much better, like, concrete sense of what her sensibilities are, the types of stories she likes to tell, thematically what she's interested in, sort of recurring character types, things like that. So this made me really excited to dive into more from N.K. Jemisin, and I definitely feel like this is a collection that's well worth picking up if you enjoy short stories and or this author and or sci-fi fantasy short stories. Next on the pile, I see The Flatshare by Beth O'Leary. So this is the one book that if I had read it a little earlier in the month would have been in contention to go on my best of romance list for 2019. And as things stand now, it is definitely in contention to be on my best romance of 2020 list, because I do think that this is a really good book. This has been very hyped up to me, and I'd seen mostly people liking it, a few people sort of visibly or like notably really not liking it. But I personally really enjoyed this one. And at the outset, I wasn't sure I would. There was a sort of compulsively bingeable quality to the writing in this, which is why I kept going even when I was having some doubts about it. But once I kind of got through that, I actually ended up quite enjoying it. And the thing that sort of gave me misgivings towards the beginning is that, and I'm still searching for the exact language around how to talk about this, but I have noticed that in British romantic comedies, chick lit, women's literature, whatever, even though they are ostensibly quite light books with a very comedic tone to them in theory, they often have this sort of thread of dourness to them, or sort of like sadness. And I don't know if that's just the difference dispositionally between Americans and Brits. You know, Americans, I remember when I lived in Canada and, you know, I went to grad school that was very international, very mixed in terms of origins. The thing people would always say, like rolling their eyes, were like, oh, you optimistic Americans. Like, we are just, as a people, just so like, we can make this work, like to our detriment sometimes. I mean, you gotta be, right? Like if you get on a boat and just like go into an ocean knowing that you might die on the way there, like there's just, I feel like just selectively in our gene pool, we're filled with like blind optimists. And that is a tone that I don't really see in a British contemporary often. Like there tends to be a little bit more of like a cynicism. I don't quite have the language, but it's something in the tone that I often notice in this type of book written by a British author, and that I find kind of off-putting for this type of book, because I feel like this should be like light and frothy. But I felt like pretty quickly I got past that because I was so sucked into this book. Like, I just really could not put it down. Very compulsively readable. I think that the kind of epistolary piece of this works really well, because if you don't know, the kind of conceit here is that there are two flatmates who have a flat share, and one of them works the day shift, one of them works the night shift. So it's a one bedroom and they are sharing a bed, but at different times. And they don't actually meet in person for a while in this book, but they're exchanging notes of like, hey, I made this thing, you can have a little bit of it, or sorry, I did this, my bad, whatever. And I just found that really charming. I really love the dynamic between the two main leads here. And what I really liked about this book, and I do think that if you're gonna read this and you have any kind of like domestic abuse type triggers, warnings you would want to know about, I would advise you to go read some reviews that talk about that in more depth. But I really liked how this very slowly unfolded with the heroine's journey of realizing that she basically had been abused and hadn't really seen that. And you can see her friend's frustration of not being able to help her when she was in that relationship the way that they wanted to. I just think that all of that very slowly unfolds in this book in a way that's really effective, and I thought was very realistic. I think because we want characters to sort of have a neat linear journey of like, I saw that this was wrong and then I was on this path of healing. And I think that in real life that there's often more of like kind of a growing awareness of something, or, you know, over time being able to see a situation in a different light and slowly making, you know, steps forward and steps back. And I really like that this book goes on that journey with the heroine, and I totally didn't see that as something that was going to happen at the beginning of the book. So I really like the way that it unfolds that piece of things. Yeah, I just really end up liking this a lot. Not my all-time favorite, but I think I totally understand why this has been a breakout hit this year, and I personally really enjoyed this book a lot. And then A Madness of Sunshine by Nalini Singh. So this is a thriller, and I talked about this quite a bit in my mid-month wrap-up, so I guess I probably don't need to say a lot about this other than this ended up making my best mystery thriller list of 2019. I really like this, really enjoyed this as a first attempt in a genre from an author I already know and love. I thought this was really effective. I really like the community elements of this. I really like the heroine's emotional journey, like our main female lead. I really liked kind of where she ended up in terms of like forgiveness and anger and things like that. I thought it was a good take, one that we don't always see in mystery thriller. And yeah, I just thought overall very effective outing, definitely a fun thriller, not too long, and I'm excited to see more from Nalini Singh in this genre. And then final hit is an arc I read for a book that's coming out in January 2020. I guess by the time you guys are seeing it, it should be coming out here in a couple of weeks. Surprising no one, I very much enjoyed the newest Lucy Parker book, which is called Headliners. It is the follow-up to the Austen playbook, which if you watch my best and worst lists, you'll know was my very favorite romance of 2019, which is saying something because romance was probably my strongest genre in 2019, and this one is just super good. Now, I will tell you, I gave this 4 stars. It's not my favorite of the series, but that's a very high bar because of these 5 books in this series, 2 of them are in my list of like all-time favorite contemporary romances. And this one is excellent. If you like a hate to love, you are gonna love this book because this is a true hate to love. And this is a hate that is like actually justified. I can't get into, like, this is where it's tricky. You could read this as a standalone, but I would advise you to at least read the Austen playbook before you read Headliners, because the reason why there is hate that's gonna have to turn into love is portrayed in the Austen playbook. So there are 2 characters that we meet in that book, and then and they have a very justified real reason why at least one of them doesn't like the other one. I think that you will get the most out of this book if you read that first. That being said, you could read this as a standalone, and if you want to, this has all the tropes that you like. It's the trope cup runneth over. There is hate to love, as I was saying. This is a workplace romance. This is a Slytherin and Slytherin romance. This is a huddle for warmth trope at some points. This is a fake relationship trope at some points. Like, it's got a lot of just very like delicious tropey candy. And I appreciate that Lucy Parker is someone who very explicitly in each of her books is tackling different conventions of the genre. Like, she's very self-aware of that. And I think trying to do something interesting with those different conventions happens in each book. I also love, like, the thing that really stands out about Lucy Parker, aside from the fact that she's just generally awesome, is the fact that I think that she, in contemporary romance, builds some of the strongest characters of anyone writing right now. Like, her characters feel very real. They have very real motivations, a real sense of interiority to me. Like, you believe that these are people who have a past and a future. Like, they just feel very lived in. And this is no exception. I think some of her actual strongest character work to date, to be totally honest. And this one's very funny because of some of the setups. Like, there's a lot of laugh out loud moments for those of you who have read this book or will read it. Shout out to the scene with the little toy robot. That made me laugh out loud. What kept me from just loving this is that if you watch this channel, you know I am kind of a hard sell on a truly a hate to love relationship. Like, if it's disdain or annoyance to love, I have discovered that I'm more open to that. But this is a situation where, like, one of them has, like, seriously wronged the other one, and they justifiably do not like this person. And it's just a little hard. It's a hard sell for me that you go from having a legitimate, real reason you don't like someone to then being in love with them and wanting to be with them forever. Hard to sell me on that. And I do think while there is genuine contrition, I think the journey of me believing that there has been forgiveness to the point where they are now going to be in a relationship forever, it didn't totally get me there. Looking at some of the other early reviews, I think that was not a problem for other readers. So if you are somebody who knows that you already know you like a hate to love trope, I don't think that that will bother you. If you're like me and that can be a little bit of a hard sell, I think this book is still enjoyable enough that you will like other pieces of it, but you probably, like me, will be like, I don't really know that I believe that we're forgiven at this point in the relationship, like 3 or 4 weeks in. So anyway, all that to say, surprising no one, I loved a Lucy Parker book that I read this month, and I'm really looking forward to everyone getting to enjoy it, and I'm ready for my next one. Where's my next one in this series? TikTok, I need a new one. So yeah, I think that that will wrap up this month of reading for December 2019, and that wraps up all of my 2019 reading in terms of my wrap-up videos. And yeah, I would say, if you couldn't tell from my videos, it was a very good year of reading for me. Some books I really loved, that I'm really passionate about, and fewer books that I just abjectly hated. So I feel like it's pretty good, right? All things considered, pretty good reading year. So that will do it for me. Definitely let me know how your holidays went, how your reading went over the holidays. Let me know that in the comments below. And yeah, I think that that will do it for me. So if you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, follow me on the social medias if you are so inclined. I have all that information listed in the description box below. And I think that that will do it. I hope you guys are having an absolutely lovely day, and I will just talk to you soon. Bye!